And let's start with Novak Djokovic versus Alexander Zverev. Now, this was quite a sort of sad occasion, I guess, because Zverev won through. He won that first set on a tiebreak, and that was it. That was your lot. Novak Djokovic retired with a leg injury. I think we believe it's a muscle tear, and he kind of walked off court, as you said, to the crowd booing him. I sort of, before we kind of talk about the action, I think the biggest talking point is this sort of booing that has happened from the crowd as Djokovic walked off the court. I mean, what did you make of that, given the fact that, as I say, all that Djokovic has done and achieved in Melbourne, for him to be booed off like that, it left me in a state of shock, really.
I was appalled by that scene. He's putting his thumbs up at the crowd because he's
Mm.
like, great, thanks for that. And I just think it's completely uncalled for. He is someone who has done so much. I mean, arguably the GOAT of all GOATs when it comes to tennis, and definitely the GOAT of the Australian Open. And for him to be treated like that, it's just so unnecessary because he actually gave them an absolute thriller of a result against Alcaraz. He had to take multiple rounds of
Mm.
medication to get himself through that. And he could have retired, he said, if he'd lost the second set there. So going into this, anyone who's a tennis fan should have known there was a significant chance that Djokovic could have retired. And the fact that he pushed Zverev as hard as he did is actually commendable. So I think I've got a bit of a problem with the Australian Open crowd now, Joel, because
Yeah.
it has not been, as you said earlier in our recording for the Australian Open, not been the happy slam. It's actually been the unhappy fan slam.
Mm.
And I'm not sure that that is a good look for the Australians.
Yeah, I mean, bigger picture. Why do you think that is? Because it's not an isolated instance. We've seen multiple times where the crowd has got involved, and it's sort of soured, I think, the occasion and the moment. And for me, like, having fans there, it adds to the it adds to the spectacle if done in the right way. Lots of people cheering, lots of people hollering. It can create a great atmosphere and sense of occasion. But when it goes beyond that, which I think we've seen too many times at this Australian Open, as I said, it sort of dampens the occasion when I'm kind of watching it on TV. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that this, particularly this event, have we seen more of these kind of moments?
I mean, we should make it clear that probably the worst behaved crowd is the French. They really go all
Mm.
in, especially when
Mm.
their French players are playing.
Or do you think it's tennis crowds in general? It's not just the Australian Open crowd. Do you feel like it's more of a tennis crowd thing at Grand Slams, and it's sort of catching on because maybe back in the day it was a bit more of the French Open that we sort of associated to, but actually it's catching on maybe to Australia as well.
It definitely could be a byproduct of them becoming more of an event than just a sports event,
Mm.
making it almost a festival-like atmosphere week one, and then you have week two and three, which are now where the actual tournament is contested. I think there was a problem in Paris this year that meant that Amelie Mauresmo actually did change the drinking rules. That was something that came into force and we debated at the time. I do think there is a tendency to go too far and have too much fun. We've seen it Kyrgios has got in trouble for saying that somebody had 1,000 drinks. Maybe we've seen some drunken behavior and some quite unpleasant behavior at slams this year. It doesn't really happen on the ATP circuit. So I
No.
think maybe because of the hype of the slams,
Yeah.
people really do just go
Different
all
type
out.
of crowd.
A different type of crowd, a less maybe informed crowd. But I would say these things don't really happen at Wimbledon. You might get the occasional person who's had too many pims. But in Australia this year, I think it's a slight unpleasantness that I'm not sure that we've witnessed. For
Mm.
Jack Draper, it can be fun, but this isn't the Davis Cup. This isn't
No,
that sort of environment. This
no.
is very much individuals playing sport. Yes, there's a flag by their name, but at the same time, booing somebody who has given so much to the tournament, it just made me think, are people just not over what happened a few years ago when it came to the
Mm.
COVID situation?
Yeah, I agree. I think I don't know if it was specifically aimed at Djokovic. I mean, it could have been they just upset. I
Want
guess
more
that they only
tennis,
had
yeah.
one. They had one set of tennis. I mean, I always feel like the men's semi-finals day arguably has more expectation on it than the men's finals day because you've got two matches. You're guaranteed to see the ultimately the champion, and you're expecting to have really high quality action. So it might have been a little bit of that. But I mean, where does this leave Novak Djokovic in terms of like his Grand Slam hopes, I think, for the rest of the season, because I feel like he got back on track here, but even though his tennis was there and it felt like it was a lot better than some of the tennis we saw in the Grand Slams last season, ultimately his body, his body kind of deserted him at the inopportune moment. Where do you think this leaves Djokovic and his kind of Grand Slam prospects for the year?
I feel a lot more confident about this Djokovic for this season than I did it after that Australian Open semi-final loss to Jannik Sinner last year. I think what happened after that was a very strange season where we wouldn't necessarily have thought that he would have got that Olympics win. That felt very improbable, which is something that's quite surprising for someone who's won so many tournaments previously and so many slams. But that did happen. And I think the question was around, what is Novak Djokovic's focus now? Will he be focused? And I feel like he really was locked in to give himself any chance of competing in that final. So I think any motivational questions should be gone. I think Andy Murray's been a great asset to his team. I think that's gone really well. And I actually think that based on this and the defeat of Carlos Alcaraz, he showed that he really is still a contender. And if he can get that body back into shape, which we know that he is very good at doing that, he can play injured. He is picking up more injuries, I should say. And winning slams after 36 is not something that the big three have done in their 37th year. That hasn't really happened. So there are challenges with that. But this was a Djokovic who was still able to he beat two-time Grand Slam champion players beaten him before. That's got to be a positive sign.
Absolutely, and it was quite interesting to hear. After Alcaraz match, he said he wished it was the finals, and perhaps I know some people are reading into that as a bit like I'm in trouble here going into the Zverev match, and ultimately, sadly, his body was not able to let him perform. I mean, just before we move on to talking about Jannik Sinner and Ben Shelton, you mentioned Andy Murray. Where does the Murray Djokovic partnership go from here? Because as I said, this was a big talking point going into the tournament. It feels like it has delivered, or there has been value there, and we have seen that across the 2 weeks. Do you expect to see more of this across the season?
That's a very good question. I mean, it's hard to know because nothing has been confirmed. They're going to talk after the tournament. One thing we do know is that Djokovic is not playing the Davis Cup, so I will not be seeing the Andy Murray Novak Djokovic train in Copenhagen when they play against Denmark.
That would be funny.
I was going to ask him
Murray
all these questions
coaching
for the
Denmark
podcast.
Serbia to a Davis Cup title.
I think is it Victor Troicki might be the captain? I'll let you know when I speak to them next week. But I think in terms of that relationship, it showed that this is positive. I do think it has helped. And I think for Novak Djokovic, having a partner in crime in some ways, I feel like a comrade in arms is actually a really positive thing. And what a lot of the players said, the vibes that you get from having a team that you like spending time with is really positive. The question that will always remain will be how much time can Andy Murray commit? Because there were lots of rumours. There were rumours. And again, we should say these are rumours. So anyone listening to this, please do not take this as us saying this is true, that Igor Swiatek was interested in Andy Murray. And he could not obviously commit to the full season with someone. Djokovic obviously doesn't play every tournament at all. He doesn't necessarily... In fact, he probably plays the least of some of the top players because of the fact he's preserving his body. So he could have a little bit of an ad hoc relationship throughout the year, a bit like what Murray had, obviously, with Lendl, where Lendl popped up at the big tournaments. Yep. So that's what I'd expect to see.
I wanted to raise it because a certain Emma Raducanu has announced that Nick Cavaday, her coach, has had to step away to focus on his health. So that opens up, I guess, yet again another spot in the coaching position for Emma Raducanu. Do you think there's a possibility? I'm just going to say it now. Can we get Andy Murray coaching Emma Raducanu this season? We've had everyone else.
That's true. After the Murakami disaster at Wimbledon.
Yes.
Yeah, they're very much back on track. Murakami was too good a name for us not to have used it more. I think there would be a good match, to be honest, because I think Raducanu needs to be taught some of that resilience and some of the discipline of the physical training that obviously, Andy Murray did on a level that no one else has done because he literally had to rehab that much more gym time because of the metal hip. So I can see him doing some consulting periods, but I don't necessarily think he's going to follow the tour, to a 250 somewhere. I'm not sure that that would warrant his departure from his family responsibilities when he could be at home or, at his lovely hotel in Scotland.
Well, let's move on to the second semi-final. Jannik Sinner versus Ben Shelton. Now, we did get a complete match here, and this was a straight sets win for Sinner, 7-6, 6-2, 6-2. And Chris, I felt like ultimately this just came down to that first set.
It did. I was watching it and I just thought, Ben, I would love this
It
to
was
be a
on his
contest.
racket.
It was, and he kind of came out there with this fantastic attitude. He was completely ignoring the rankings.
Broke Sinner in his first game, I think.
It was quite a statement when he went kind of 2-1 up. I thought, hang on a minute. Obviously, they got back on serve, but he really had the chance to do it. But it's funny because I was thinking about this match and the fact that it feels like young Benny boy sort of thing. And the reality is there's literally less than a year between them. When you think about it, we feel like Jannik Sinner is a lot more mature than he maybe is because he's had so much success so young and so much success in the last year. But they probably were playing each other in juniors quite a lot. So it's actually not necessarily the David and Goliath situation that maybe we thought it was, because when you have that history, it kind of evens it out a little bit. So I think that's what we saw in the first set. But after that, it was one-way traffic, Joel. It wasn't the most entertaining. So do you have any sympathy for the crowd with the fact they didn't necessarily get that much tennis?
I I, I do, but I also think that you're never guaranteed anything when you go as a fan, to a stadium to watch tennis. And I think the matter of men's semi-finals day, I do think for me it is like in some ways the most sought after ticket, even more than the final, because you're getting two singles matches of real caliber and quality, and you get to see you can come
You could
home
get
from
10
it
sets,
saying,
couldn't you?
yeah, and you come home from it saying, at the end of the day, I saw the I saw the champion. So I can understand it from that point of view. But yeah, this was very straightforward for Sinner, and it was straightforward regardless of the fact that, I mean, at the start of that third set, he was caught on camera limping, which again was a bit of an interesting one. I was kind of reading, is this an injury? Is this actually just cramping? But it didn't actually. It actually didn't really matter, and it got me thinking. Like, even if he is sort of maybe struggling a little bit, Jannik Sinner's still like the world number one.
There's an element of like Terminator about Djokovic and Sinner that they may be kind of sort of cobbled together, but they're still able to keep going. And it makes me think about what on earth are they taking in between these things that kind of helps them to recover? Like when Djokovic took the medicine twice during that match with Alcaraz to get through the Rune match, Sinner looked down and out. He looked like he was so unwell.
Yeah.
And obviously when he was unwell at Wimbledon, it was also a case that Medvedev was just able to get past him, but it was a just. So I think that just shows there's this resilience, as well as the fact that obviously the medical team behind the scene, the physical teams, the physios they work with are doing such a great job. So it's hard to read into that injury and think he won't be able to compete in the final. But at the same time, I'm gonna have to rethink my whole thoughts on this because Djokovic obviously pulled out, and you never know how close another player is to. Like if Sinner had lost that first set, would anything have changed?
Yeah, I agree. It would have been, when that's not the situation you want to be in, if you're feeling, yeah, some sort of physical effect. I mean, let's move on and look at the final because it's Jannik Sinner versus Alexander Zverev. They've both been in two Grand Slam finals before, and interestingly, Sinner is 2-0 in Grand Slam finals, and Zverev is 0-2. Zverev does lead the head-to-head 4-2, but I mean, where do you see this match being won and lost between the number one and number two seed?
I think, I mean, Zverev needs to serve really well. I think in that match with Djokovic, I was actually quite surprised it went down so close. When you look at the numbers, Zverev has a habit of playing pretty well, 24 winners, 15 unforced errors, and he actually almost didn't win that set. If Djokovic had made that volley in the open court, they would have gone to 6-all, I believe, and then it would have continued. Whereas Djokovic had made 11 winners and 16 unforced errors. So he's got a habit of playing the better tennis, but not getting the win. And so I think he actually really needs to win the bigger points and he needs to make sure that it's not just the numbers he's putting together, he's winning the points that matter. And that's what Sinner has always done so well, especially since he's become world number one. So I think Zverev needs to serve well. I think the return of Jannik Sinner is going to be important. I think also the nerves. We do talk about this a lot. The reason why he's 0 from 2 is because he has bottled it a couple of times in really big moments. He's been up in both of those finals and he hasn't won it. Whereas I actually think Sinner was down against Medvedev and then he won it. So there's a mentality that will really help Sinner there. But in terms of the matchup, where do you think that from a gameplay perspective, it could be won and lost?
I do think there's a lot riding on the Zverev serve. The fact that he can get through kind of his service games, in theory, quite easily, and then put pressure on the Sinner return. I think that could be a thing. I think
physically,
also just physically,
I also to 5.
I do think that the longer it goes on, arguably, I think that does favour Zverev, given the run he's had to the final. And actually, if you look at their head-to-head meetings, they're all pretty competitive, and they all feel like they have been physical battles. I mean, obviously, what comes to mind, the 2023 US Open, round 4, when Zverev won against Sinner, it went 5 sets, over 4 hours. I think we could be in for a really attritional physical battle. And I think Zverev, maybe part of the plan is to keep Sinner out on court as long as possible, because we've seen already that, in this tournament with the shakes, this limp, in the semi-final, that there is some vulnerability there, I think, from Sinner.
There definitely is. I think it's been a tournament he's come through, but not necessarily a tournament where he's played his best tennis. I mean, against Alex de Minaur, he was, a level above what he has been previously. I think probably looking at this match, if they're both physically fit, you would have to say that the world number one Sinner will be the one to do it. But there's something about this matchup this year that makes me think that actually all is not right with Sinner, and that maybe
it's more 50-50 to me. And I'm not as concerned, I think, about Zverev's 0-2 record in Grand Slam finals. I do think he's learnt from those moments, and there's a bit more of a maturity. And maybe he did get a bit of luck, with the Djokovic result in the semi, and he's only had to play one set. But if there is a moment, this is the moment to do it.
It is. And I think from a predictions perspective, we've got to commit to something, Joel. That's part of what we signed up to. So would you like to go first?
Okay. I'm going to go... Do you know what? This goes against everything I'd normally stand for. I'm going to go Zverev in 4.
See, I was actually thinking about saying that, but it's so hard to know because Djokovic was on sort of one leg today and he almost won that set. I think that Sinner might get it done in 3. I think it might be quite similar. I either think it's going to go Zverev in 4 or 5 or Sinner in 3, which is, I can't really be on both sides of that. So I will go Sinner in 3 just because based on Zverev's previous history, I do think that there will be doubts. And I can see it being 7-6, 5-7, 7-5, sorry, 7-6. I can see it being like very edgy.
I can see it being very edgy. I can see it being very nervy, and it'll be interesting, to see how I think Zverev more than Sinner handles the occasion, because he's been there before and it's not gone that well. But we shall see.